Welcome back to Chapter 7 of The Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I'm author Dan Allen. This is Bridget the Bunny, and this is Davy the Dragon. Last chapter, we learned that Tobias had met the Princess of Hanover, but we're now going to learn what happens to Claire deep in the limestone caverns of Goblin Towne. Chapter 7 of The Goblin Curse of Hamlin, A Trap for Lefler. It was now many months from her arrival in Goblin Town, and Claire was missing her family sorely. But she smiled at the thought of being with people she loved, and wished that she could somehow bring more joy to her new people. For the old Goblin King had died, and the people of Goblin Town were quite in need of happiness. With the old ruler gone, the goblins looked on Claire as their princess and leader. Though the elders of Goblin Town did the usual business, Claire was the hope of the people. She wore a clear gem around her neck that gave light, so that the people smiled when they saw her, or when she waved to them, and they took courage. Living in the caves was dreary at times, and only a few were privileged to leave to gather food in the forest, since this was such a dangerous and risky business. What do you think, Davy? Would you do it? Of course he would, he's a dragon. So Claire was often without the company of Lefler, who grew day by day into a wonderfully useful gatherer and brought news of the human world. He always managed to put curious young goblins into fits of giggles when he told of humans' follies such as stumbling in the dark and accusing neighbors of taking livestock which had been taken by the goblins, in exchange for sharpening the man's knives and tools. But the humans, of course, never made any fuss over whom to thank for the sharpened tools. For this was the goblins' custom, always to give something in return from what they took from humans without permission. Would you rather a goblin show up at your house in the middle of the night to ask about trading for your cows, or just go about his business without you knowing? That's so terrifying, Bridget the Bunny just fainted. Stay. So it was that Lefler was out among the humans again running errands when he chanced upon something very strange. Now this time Lefler was on his way to Hamlin to go fishing and steal some geese in exchange for a bucket of pitch he had brought from the caves. Now pitch is a very useful sort of black slime, which is the same as tar. It will stop leaks in boats and roofs. Lefler traveled swiftly and silently, keeping to the greener parts of the wood. As he scampered low to the ground, the sounds of merry music came to his ears. And as he neared Hamlin, the tunes became louder and louder. The strange thing was, Lefler could not hear it with his human ears, but only with his goblin hearing, which could only mean one thing. He had gone crackers. Who could be making goblin music out in the forest, and how? Lefler was not really as good at being careful as he was at being curious. He ventured nearer until he found a clearing in the forest such as deer graze in. In the clearing was a man, for it was bigger than a goblin. It had in its hands something made of tiny wooden stalks all bunched together, which it held up to its mouth and blew upon. "Why, those are miniature pan-flute pipes," Lefler said aloud in goblin speak. He wasn't as careful as he might have been, but this young man did not hear him, which made the music even stranger. "Here's a fellow playing music that's so high-pitched he can't even hear it, in the middle of the forest, in the middle of the night. I must be cave crazy." In spite of it all, Lefler hummed along with the tune, wondering to himself, "Where have I heard that before?" As the music played on, his ears were reminded of words that went along with the music. It was a hymn sung by Claire to the goblins on Sunday morning when they took a rest from foraging and repairing and digging to listen to some good words out of the Bible in goblin tongue. "Ah," said Lefler, clapping his hand over his bald spot. "That is one of Claire's favorite songs, and that must be the brother of Claire. I recall his features now: narrow chin, long nose, wild eyebrows, and ugly brown hair. He mistook me once for an angel." Then, as he peered at Claire's brother, who was Tobias, the piping stopped. "He's seen my eyes again," Lefler thought. "Hello, Angel Goblin," Tobias said. Lefler answered with a hello in goblin tongue, which to Tobias's ears was no more than a pip, and might have been a bark beetle burping as much as a goblin speaking. "I have a gift for you and Claire." Tobias held out the specially made pipes, which played only notes in the goblin hearing range. He set them upon the ground and then backed away into the forest. Lefler waited. He looked about for many minutes, not moving, so that several creatures passed through the clearing while he waited without noticing his presence. An owl caught a vole. A squirrel came down a tree and vanished into a log. When the curious goblin could stand it no longer, he swooped into the clearing and grabbed up the pipes, then dashed away to avoid any traps. He was so excited about the present that he returned to the Goblin Cave straight away. But then he was chastised for leaving buckets of pitch in the forest and not bringing back any geese, and was made to go back and finish the geese pitch switch the next evening. But the gift he kept secret until he could meet with Claire alone. She was attended by so many of the lady goblins that it was difficult to even catch her eye, though she always smiled when she did manage to catch his eye. On the day of his return from fishing errands, Lefler waited upon a stone bridge above a pool in the quartz caverns in the old Upper West Quarter, hewn out in forgotten days by ambitious goblins. It was a long walk from Goblin Town, but the cave road was well made. Only a few leaps of 10 yards or less were required to get there, plus one cliff climb and a passage behind one underground waterfall. The room Lefler waited in was surrounded by glassy crystals, with pools of pure water that ran out as warm springs into a stream, leaving stains of green and amber along the jagged quartz, where bacteria that love warm water had left rusty residues. The air was also freshest here, as it was closer to the surface, and there were many more vents. This was where Claire came to bathe. Lefler knew it because he made it his business to sometime overhear some words that passed between her ladies-in-waiting. It was his best chance to hear her alone, but he wondered if the whole time he was just being a fool. Waiting alone in Claire's bath cave, Leffler's feet tops were bumbled as they always were when he was nervous. His shoulders were dry and his ears were itchy, but his heartbeat was measuring time out of tempo, and this made the waiting all the more unbearable. When will she come? Will she come alone? What will she think when she sees me here? Because he was so apt to do things with his hands without thinking first, as are many young people, Lefler put the pipes upon his lips and began to practice them, despite his earlier intent to first deliver them to Claire. The halls of the quartz cavern filled with the sweet sounds. His lips stumbled from pipe to pipe until he found the notes that made the song which Tobias had played, the one that Claire loved. He was in this mode when she found him. Claire waited at the entrance from the side corridor and listened, heart pounding within her, wondering if it was an angel, if angels came so low as to enter caverns. She had never before heard any musical instruments with her goblin ears besides harps, which were always going out of tune. Peering around a stalagmite column into the crystal cavern, in which were set 3 glowstones in the ceiling that scattered brilliantly off the white crystal walls and watery pools, Claire saw the figure of Lefler in his rabbit-skin clothing, crouched upon the stone bridge that spanned the stream, holding something tiny in his hands. "Lefler," Claire called with a laugh, "what are you doing?" Lefler blew one harsh note as he was terribly surprised by Claire's coming in the opposite way as he had come. He clumsily hid the pipes behind his back and smiled widely, showing all his nice sharp teeth in 2 rows. "Do you have something behind your back?" she asked, toeing slowly into the room so that her legs showed first as she came in, which was very distracting to Lefler, although it wasn't intended to be so. "I think you were waiting for me." Yes," Lefler said. "I didn't mean to interrupt your bath, but I did hope to see you, before you go in." Claire, too, now was somewhat nervous, wrapping her arms more tightly around herself as if to keep warm, though the temperature everywhere in the caves was always hot. She was wearing the threadbare dress she had worn the night Lefler had first rescued her. "That's your old dress," Lefler said keenly. "Yes. It isn't proper to wear in Goblin Town, I know, but I felt I should find some use for it, so I wear it to—" Claire giggled. "How did you know I come here to bathe?" Bumps began to show on Leffler's forehead. Good guess, maybe?" "You're either very clever," Claire said, "or very determined." She stepped onto the bridge and clasped her fingers together in front of her. "Will you show me how you made the music?" Lefler smiled again. "Sure." He held out the pipes. Claire waited expectantly, at which Lefler suddenly sputtered, "Oh, you mean me to play the music now?" Claire nodded with a giggle. Lefler sucked in a breath so large that his skinny chest doubled in size and put his lips upon the small handmade pipes. He began to play the hymn again, and then Claire began to sing along to it. The music was beautiful. When the song was finished, Claire hugged Lefler around his narrow waist, so that her longish arms wrapped easily around him and back around herself. She laid her head against his shoulder and sighed. "That was wonderful," said Lefler, who was being squeezed. "I expect there's some story about these pipes," Claire said, releasing Lefler from her goblin hug. "Goblin hugs are quite difficult to escape from, so you must be patient until the other person is done hugging you, like hugs from grandmas. Can you tell me about how you came upon these pipes while I take my bath?" "How shall I tell you if you're taking a bath? I must be gone." "I think it best to hear the story alone first," Claire said wisely. in case parts of it involve things a curious goblin did that aren't meant for hearing by many ears. By this, she assumed that Lefler had gotten the pipes as a result of too much curiosity and much sneaking around, and possibly some snatching without repayment. Then Claire explained, "You may wait in the pool opposite me, and we shall be quite hidden from each other." Lefler, who was very dirty and needed a bath anyway, had no room to argue with the Goblin Princess, so she jumped into her pool, which was cool, and Lefler jumped into his pool, which was warm. And while the streaming water rinsed their leathery skin, causing it to wrinkle greatly, Lefler told the story of meeting her brother in the woods and receiving the pipes. "His name is Tobias," Claire said. "It is wonderful to know he is well. It has been almost a year since we saw him last. He's probably grown beyond recognition." "But so have you," Claire added, unwisely. "Yes," Claire agreed reluctantly. "Tobias would not recognize me at all. He would cry in fright and run." "No," Lefler retorted. "He's brave enough to love anything that's good, even if it frightens him a bit at first." "He has gained some skill in making pipes, it seems," Claire added, changing the subject from her frightful appearance. "I've seen him piping songs in the mornings and evenings in Hamlin," Lefler reported, "but I'd never seen him play in the forest until the night before last." "It was his plan to lure you," Claire determined, "and his best chance to meet a goblin." "But he left as soon as he noticed that I was listening," Lefler mused. Claire joined in the wondering. "Perhaps he's afraid of you." "Perhaps," said Lefler, who was quite clean by now, or so he supposed. He stood up to leave, but Claire protested. "Wait, I'm still uncovered, and you haven't even scrubbed behind your ears." Leffler's face would have been bumpled had it not already been wrinkled like an old woman's hands from soaking up so much water. He scrubbed dutifully behind his ears with a bit of pumice rock, then begged permission to be excused. "On one condition," Claire said with a smile. Now, before I tell you what condition she put upon Lefler, I must make an immediate intrusion into this account to apprise you of what has taken place outside the cave. It was winter, and then it was beginning to be spring. The snow melted, so children of Hamlin began to gather buckets of water from their mothers from the well in the town square. About this time, Tobias got a bit of inspiration during a chapel service, wherein he suddenly realized, since the rat problem happened each spring, it must have something to do with the well, because it was not used during the winter when clean water could be melted from any bucketful of snow. Never use yellow snow. Tobias was the first to realize the well in Hamlin Square might have something to do with the Goblin Curse. Perhaps this was because his experiment with thinking had gotten out of control. He was quite addicted to thinking by now, and thought all the time when he wasn't playing on pipes in the town square. By all this thinking, he came upon a fanciful and dangerous plan to save any children who might catch the Goblin Curse. "I shall recognize them first," Tobias explained to no one in particular, as he walked home along a dusty human road from his encounter with Lefler. "By playing upon my human pipes, intermingled with goblin pipes, I can play two rhythms at once. Only, children who are soon to become goblins will hear the double beat coming from the low pipes and the high-pitched goblin pipes together, so the goblin children will dance faster than the others. My second step shall be to entice them to follow me into the woods, and there I shall introduce them to the angel goblin Lefler, and they shall be saved before they're in any danger from Cato's fear and hatred." This was a pretty clever plan. So Tobias made a special set of pipes which he never let other folks play upon. These made music not just for humans to hear, but also for humans who were becoming goblins. By and by, Tobias met Lefler again in the forest and agreed that on a certain day in the evening he would bring any children who were the rats of Hamlin. On the 2nd day of May, which was 1 year from the time Lefler had come to save Claire, Tobias went out early to the town square. By this time he knew of 2 children who were succumbing to the Goblin Curse, by reason of their dancing to the goblin pipe rhythm. Tobias had learned their favorite songs by heart and fused them into a wondrous melody to be played only upon the goblin pipes. When the 2 sisters who were becoming goblins arrived at the well, they were the first of the day, as goblins are wont to be awake at night. Tobias's pipes captured their attention, and they began to dance and skip towards him, so they might better hear the music. Tobias kept playing the pipes and danced with them, turning about and leading their little company farther and farther from the well. Still dancing until they reached the edge of the forest, where Tobias caught both of them about their waists and rushed into the woods. All that day he carried the girls, who protested and tried to escape despite his promises that he was saving them, until at last he reached the clearing where Lefler was to meet him. But Lefler had not come alone. Claire was also there. This was the promise which Claire had put upon Lefler in the Crystal Cavern, to escort her into the woods so that she might have a chance to see her brother again. Tobias only recognized her from her old dress, as also did the other girls, and they waved to her and she waved back. Claire, the Goblin Princess, spoke to the girls in Goblin tongue, and they remembered her, since she was their friend only removed from memory by the brief span of 1 year. Once they had heard from her about Goblin Town, they all agreed it was best to go with Claire, and then it was time to leave. Tobias reached out his hands and grasped Claire's, whose fingers were terrifyingly long and sharp. There he vowed that he would return in 1 year's time with any other rats he might find among the children. Now it was some good fortune that nobody had seen Tobias carry off the girls, for if anyone had spied the capture, Tobias would surely have been sentenced to death by hanging. Now Tobias was not a child snatcher, but the bravest and kindest person remaining in Hamlin, so he prepared better during the course of the next year. At certain times he would lead all the children about on parades through the town or around the town, until the children had all learned to follow his lead and turn this way or that, depending on the song, and it became a great game for them to follow the piper. By the time spring came, it was no trouble at all to lead away one boy deep into the forest one morning as he expected it was a game with a surprise at the end. And there was a surprise, for he was introduced by Tobias to a fearsome-looking goblin wearing rabbit-skin underwear. This year it was only Lefler in the clearing, who explained to the boy, with goblin-hearing ears, that Claire could not come by reason of too many humans snooping about in the forest. It seems the people of Hamlin had gone looking for the boy, so it was lucky that Lefler had found them first. The boy was excited to live among the goblins, for it was a great adventure to him. But it was still hard to want to stop being a human, so Lefler promised to get him a goblin knife, and that convinced him thoroughly. But then something happened which was certainly the greatest surprise of this story so far. A notice was posted in Hamlin by the cathedral with its new windows, which was read aloud by some of the more clever townsfolk to all the rest, who waited upon every word as though it were a message sent from St. Peter himself. Tobias joined in the throng, crowding the posted message. Father Cato is hereby appointed by the Church of Rome to be Bishop of Hanover and Counselor to the Duke of Hanover until such time as his services are required by the Church in whatsoever capacity the Lord causeth his servants to call upon them, read the villager, and so on and so forth. This was the best news Tobias had ever heard. Father Cato would be gone to Hanover, and whatever new priest came to Hamlin to replace him might look kindly upon the poor goblin children and not try to put them away as Father Cato had done. Perhaps I can put away the goblin pipes forever, and we may all live happily, and Claire may come out from the cave, Tobias said when he was out of earshot from the other villagers. On this day, which was the 10th of March, Tobias considered telling his mother and father that Claire was not dead after all, and that if the new priest was kind to goblin children, that she might return to live with them. But coming to the cottage, his heart lost the courage. These days, he was less welcome in the house, since he was bigger and ate more food. Although the sales of his pipes did aid the family somewhat, buyers were few this time of year when no visitors traveled on account of the still cold weather and the wind and the bad roads. I'm too great a burden on them, he told himself. I must find my fortune and make my own household. But this thought caused him to think and also to mourn. There was no other girl whom he had loved and wanted to marry since the day he first set eyes on the Princess of Hanover. No woman's eyes had ever met his in so complete a sharing of souls. In the truth of his heart, Tobias knew he could never deny that. Perhaps he might find a willing bride in Hamlin, but even considering that end brought such a cold darkness into his heart that he couldn't bear to dwell on it. Such was his condition when, a month later, another official notice arrived in Hamlin. This was signed in great flourishes of lettering, and of course, Tobias could not read it by himself, but relied on the newly arrived Father Ecclesiasticus to read it for him as the crowd pressed closely about them. The young priest read the bold words first. A tournament! The end of Chapter 7 of The Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I'm author Dan Allen. Join us next time for Chapter 8.